Hello everyone, I'm Arunima from Knit-A-Knotter, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make the Luxury Plaid Tunisian Poncho. It is a poncho that is made with the Entrelac technique, and it's fairly straightforward. It's not difficult at all if you are aware of how to if you're aware of the Entrelac technique, then it should be really easy. If not, that's fine too. I have a separate video for showing you how to work with the Entrelac technique, and so I'm not going to go into the details of that in this video, but you're welcome to check the other one out. And for the purpose of this video, I'm going to make a smaller version of the poncho with smaller squares. So for the full pattern, that is available for free. It is on my blog, and I will add a link to the description below so you can find the full pattern on my blog. So that's pretty much it. Let's get started. So the yarn first. I used Karen Simply Soft by Yarnspirations, and I used 3 colors. This is white, so these are my leftovers from after I made my poncho, so they're not full skeins, but this is the white, this is the black, and this is the gray heather from the Heathers series. So you will need all 3 colors to make this poncho, and for the requirements of yardage requirements, you can again, you'll have to look at my blog for the pattern details. I'm not going to cover that in this video. This is just to show you how to make it. Another thing that I did in this pattern is that I added a faux fur trim. So without the trim, I loved my poncho, but after adding the trim, I love it even more. So I highly recommend doing this. This step will be optional, but this is the yarn I use. It's Lion Brand yarn, go for faux, thick and quick, and I'll show you how to attach this to the poncho as well in the end. So that's about it for the yarn. For the hook, I used an 8mm Tunisian crochet hook. This is from the Clover Takumi series, and you could use any hook with that will work with this yarn. So this is the one I used, and this is the pattern that I'm going to show you how to make. So this is just a very tiny version of the final pattern. It has the plaid pattern. It has the section where you will have the slit in the front, while the back part will be a rectangular panel, and the front will be 2 smaller rectangles which will be split right in the middle. The front and back will have the exact same length, and so this is the exact same pattern, or just a tinier version of it. So I'm going to show you how to make this little panel here instead of the entire poncho. So once you understand how to make this, it will be just making a bigger version of this, and it should be very straightforward once you understand how to make this. So I'm going to start at this end over here and work my way like that. So for the Entrelac technique, I'll make this square first, and then I'm going to make this diagonal, and then this diagonal, and then I'll show you how I'm going to make this diagonal with the slit here, and then this, and then finally complete this little tiny poncho. So I'm going to get started. So I'm going to get started with this square here. For this square, I'm going to start, so this is a black square, so I'm going to start with my black yarn. And this is the first square that we're going to make for this poncho. So I'm going to make smaller squares for this video than the actual pattern. That's because it's going to take me a while to make the bigger squares, and it won't really help you much. I'm just going to show you how to make this with smaller squares so you can get a feel of how to make this rather than following along. So I'm going to start here with the black square. For this video, I'm going to make squares of 7 stitches and 5 rows. So each square will be 7 stitches, 5 rows. I'm going to start with 7. So that's 7 chain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm going to make my foundation row stitches in the back loop. Again, I have a separate tutorial for how to make your foundation row. You could make your foundation stitches anywhere. It won't really matter for this pattern, but I usually like to make my foundation row stitches in the back loop, and that's what I recommend as well. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that's 7 stitches after the 7 loops on your hook after the forward pass, and then the reverse pass. So that's the foundation row with 7 stitches. I'm going to move this to the side. So I'm going to make 4 more rows of these 7 stitches to complete my first square. So this is row 2. So that completes 5 rows, and now I want to complete my square, so I'm going to make a bind off row. And I have a separate video for to explain how to make the bind off row, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail here, but here is how I do it. So this is a square of Tunisian simple stitches, and I'm just gonna make simple stitches and bind off with a slip stitch. And that's it. So that completes my first square. So that's the pattern, and this is the first square that I just completed. So I'm going to cut my yarn, and at this point I could choose to weave in ends as I go, or I could do it in the end. So I'm just going to leave it for now, and I'm going to weave in ends after a bit. So that's the first square done. Now after this is done, we're going to make the next diagonal, which is this one here. So that's with the heather gray yarn, and that's what I'm going to start doing now. So I'm going to start making the second square, so the second diagonal, which is this one. So this is the square that I'm going to make now. Here is the pattern for reference, and I'm going to attach my gray yarn here. And because I had 7 stitches, I'm going to make a chain 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to make my foundation row just like the first square. 6, and the last stitch will be made in the first stitch of the first row of the previous square. So it goes right here, and that gives me 7 loops on my hook. So that's 2, 4, 6, 7, and so this will make a square with 7 stitches, and I'm going to make 5 rows. So this is basically the join as you go technique. So I'm making squares and I'm joining them as I go. So the reverse pass of the first row here, and I'm just going to make 4 more rows on top of this and join them with the square as I go. So here is row 2, So to complete this, I'm going to make the bind off row for this square. And I'm going to attach this here. So I've seen that with this yarn, this is not very stretchy, so I've had trouble with inserting my hook into the stitch here to attach it to the other square. So what I use is I use another hook which is smaller in size. I pull that out just to help with it, and then slip stitch here. So that completes that next square. That is this one. So this square is complete, and now this loop here will count as the first stitch or first loop for the next square, which will be this one. So we're going diagonally, so we're going to make this square next, which will be on top of this square here. So I'm going to use this as my first, and then I like to make my next square directly on top of the stitches here, the simple stitches here. You could make them here, or you could make them in the slip stitches, the bind off stitches that you made. It's up to you, but I'm going to make them in these simple stitches from this square. So I'm going to make another square with 7 stitches and 5 rows, which will be right on top of the first square that we made. So this is sort of a continuation of this previous square, and that's 2, 4, 6, 7, the reverse pass. So I'm going to continue doing this, make 4 more rows and make the bind off row. So this is the end of row 5, and I'm going to make the bind off row now. And that's it. So that completes the second diagonal. Here is the first square that corresponds to this, and then the diagonal squares, the gray diagonal squares, that these are the 2 here. And next we're going to work on the next diagonal, which is the alternating red, black and white. And before doing that, I'm going to cut the yarn here. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and weave in ends. I usually I usually weave in my ends at the end of 2 diagonals sort of. So this is 1 and this is 2. So I'm going to weave in ends before I start my next. So I'm going to see you after I weave in my ends, and we're going to start working on that third diagonal. So here it is. I have weaved in the ends for these squares. It looks like this at the back. Fairly neat. If you see that there is a little bump over here, that is because I didn't make my simple stitches in the bind off row. I made them in the previous simple stitch row, so that's why that's that little bump. And I'm okay with that, and that's how my poncho will be from the back. Like every square where it's attached to the previous one, there will be that little bump. And now we're going to continue with the pattern, and we're going to make this third diagonal, which is black, white, and then black. So we're going to start with the black and attach it to this square here. And this square will be made exactly the same way as we made this gray one. So I'm going to chain 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and make my foundation row in the back loops. and my last stitch here. So that should be 7. 2, 4, 6, 7. So that's 7 loops on the hook, and it's my reverse pass, and I'm going to continue making this square just like this previous one, this one over here. So it's 7 stitches including that join here and 5 rows of that. So that's 5 rows, and I'm going to complete it with the bind off row. And again, attaching here, inserting my hook has been hard, so I'm just going to use this one. Again, I think it's just with this yarn that I've faced this problem. Otherwise, I've done entrelac with other yarn, and I was able to comfortably insert my hook there. I could probably even make this first stitch during the bind off a little loose to help with this, but I've always carried an extra hook, a smaller size hook, so I can pull that yarn comfortably from that loop there. And so this is just a slip stitch, and that completes that first square of that diagonal. So here is the pattern. So this is the first 4 squares. So if you look at this, it mirrors this pattern exactly. This gray square is here, the black, the gray, and the black. So the next square that we're going to make is this white one. So to do that, I'm going to attach my white yarn right here. And this is how I do it. I usually like to attach my yarn after completing the previous square, so that's what I've done here. Now, the one thing that I'd like to show you in particular is how I carry this yarn to the other side, because the next square that I will make, so right now I'm making this white square, the next square I have to make is the black one. So I could either cut this yarn, weave in ends, and then reattach the yarn here, which for this small pattern seems fine, but if you make the poncho, that is a lot of ends to weave in, and if you're like me, you wouldn't like to do that. I am not very fond of weaving in ends, so I like to keep them to the minimum. And so that's why I found a way to be able to carry this black yarn at the back while making this square, so I don't have to worry about weaving in all those ends at the end. Okay, so to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my white yarn. So this end is the one that needs to be weaved in eventually, so I'm going to leave that behind and not worry about that. So these are the two I'm going to work with. This is the white yarn, I take it back, and then I take the black one, I push it over the white, and I pull the white back in front. So that sort of interlocks them, and I'm going to make my first simple stitch. And then for the next stitch, I'm going to bring my white yarn forward, bring the black over it, pick the white, and make my next simple stitch. And then for the next one, push this to the back, pick it up, push this to the back, and pick up my white. And here for the next, I bring the white forward, black on top, white from behind, and simple stitch. The next one, white goes back, black goes back, pick up the white here, and for the last stitch I'm just going to attach the first one here and make sure that I'm picking the black in the back of this here. So that's an entire row, and you can see that the black is nicely hidden in the back here, and it's carried all the way to this side, and I'm going to carry it all the way on this side up here to the top so I can use it here. So I'm going to now make the reverse pass just the usual. And I'm going to continue making. So I'm going to make 5 rows total of 7 stitches here, just like any other square I've made, or just like these squares that I've made. And the only difference being that when I join this last one, I make sure that I have this black yarn in the back, so it's being carried at the back, and it won't be visible after I've made this square. So I'm going to make the square and I'll show you how it looks at the back. And the last row will be the bind off row. And I'm going to make this last one here. Again, making sure that I have this black in trapped in there. Here. That's how it is. I can see a little bit of the black peeping here, and I don't mind that, again, because the pattern is such that it's a mix of white and black, so it sort of looks gray and it blends in with this gray here. So you can see at the back here the black is barely visible, like we've carried it all the way here. You can probably see a little bit over here. It's there in the back, and it's been carried over here, which you can just now pick from here and start using, so you won't have to cut and weave in ends and reattach. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attach that black yarn, just pick it from where it was, and that becomes my first stitch for the next square, which will be this one. So we just completed this white square, and now I'm going to make this black one. So this is going to be exactly the same way, done the same way as this previous gray square. I don't have to carry this white yarn anymore because I don't have another square to make here. But in the poncho pattern, like when you're making the entire thing, you will most likely have to carry this yarn. Well, you will have to carry this yarn so that you can use it on the other side. Again, that is optional. You could cut and reattach if you'd like. You'll just have a lot of ends to weave in. So for now, I'm going to cut this yarn because that's all I need. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to continue working with my black yarn and make another square on top of that previous gray. There you go. That's how it looks at the end of 3 diagonals. I'm calling it 3 diagonals. I'm calling the first one also a diagonal. So that's my first one. That's that. And then that's the gray is the second. That's that. And there's the black, white, and black, which is the third one. So now I'm going to cut this yarn here. And I'm going to, well, I could again weave in ends, or I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to weave in ends now so I can show you how to make the next part, which is this part where there is this slit in the middle, and then continue making it with the gray yarn. So I'm going to weave in ends and I'm going to see you again. So this is how it's looking after completing this section here, 3 diagonals, and I just weaved in all ends. If you see at the back, they're nicely woven in. You can barely see them. I know it, I've put it here, so there's a little bump, but That's so you'll have a maximum of 4 ends to weave in if you are carrying the yarn at the back per diagonal. So I like that. That's why I do the extra work of carrying the yarn in the back. Now I'm going to start making this square here. So this is the diagonal we're going to work on. So I'm going to start making this square. So for that, I'm going to attach my yarn over here. And I'm going to make my square just as I normally would. So that's going to count as my first stitch. This is stitch number 2, just simple stitches on top of the previous black square. And then attaching with this white over here, the first row. So that's 7, 2, 4, 6, 7. In again, just to remind you, in the pattern the number of the size of the squares is different, it's larger, so your number of loops on the hook will be different, but it will be the same for every row. It'll be different from what I'm doing over here, but it'll be the same for every row that you make for each square. So that completes the first square for this diagonal. So that completes this square. Now this is the part which I would like to explain a little in detail. For this square here, I'm going to split my square into 2. So again, in this video, I have 7 stitches, which in hindsight I should have probably used even number of stitches for the video, but I'm going to have an uneven split. I'm going to have 3 stitches first and then 4 stitches next. So I'm going to, this should be an even split. It should have been equal number of stitches on both sides, which it is in the poncho pattern. It's equal number of stitches, but for the purpose of this video it's going to be an uneven split. So I'm going to do 3 stitches on this right side and 4 stitches on the left side. So this will be 3 stitches and this will be 4 stitches. So basically what we're doing here is we're making, instead of this one square, we're going to make 2 rectangles which are not joined in the center. So we're sort of making another, say, an entrelac here and an entrelac here, and I liked, you can just go ahead and make them separately. Like you could do this section first and then do this section, or you could do the entire thing at once. I like to do the entire thing at once so I could carry the same, I could work with the same set of yarns that I had, because each diagonal has, so for the gray diagonal I'm only using gray yarn, and for the black and white diagonals I'm using black and white yarn. So I just continued making my diagonals as I went, like this. But you can totally make this one separately and this one separately. The only difference being that the first and last, so for this section, the last square is not really a square, it's a rectangle and it stops at half. And for this section, it's the first square is not a square, it's a rectangle and it begins with half. So I'm going to make this one here, and I'm going to make it with 3 stitches. So that's my first stitch. To take another one, and that's 3. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to make 5 rows of these 3 stitches, and that'll make a rectangle of 3 stitches, 5 rows. So that's 1, and I'm going to make the bind off row. And I'm going to cut my yarn, and at this point you can either weave in this end, or you can leave this to be weaved in later. So you see that I've made this portion where it's a rectangle, technically half the size of this, but for now it's a little off because of the number of stitches I have on this, but in the poncho you'll have the exact number of stitches on both sides. So this is 3 stitches right now, and I'm going to now make this part, which is going to be right here. So I'm going to attach my gray yarn again over here. So this is, I'm going to attach it here with the first simple stitch that's available after the one that's made. So that makes my first simple stitch for this rectangle, and then I'm going to make 2 more and then attach with the last one here, with this panel here. So that's 4 stitches, and I'm going to complete that row. So I'm going to make 5 more rows of, in this case, 4 stitches. So the best part that I like about the gray section is that I don't have to carry any yarn in the back. I can just focus on making my squares and rectangles rather than having to worry about this other strand of yarn, which I need to make sure that I'm carrying at all times. So that's the 5th row, and I'm going to make my bind off row now. And that's it. So if you look at this, I have my square. Sorry, that's the square and that's the square. So it is a square that is made up of 2 split rectangles. There's this one and there's this one. So if you look at it together, it looks like a square, 5 stitches. 7 stitches, but it's split at the middle. So now I'm going to continue making the next square, which is this one, and that will be on top of this. So it'll be just the same as any other square that I've made at the end over here. So it'll be just like the square that I made previously. So 7 stitches. And that completes that square there. I'm going to cut the yarn. So So here is how it's looking after making that fourth diagonal. It's that's the first one. There's the second, the gray, the third with the blacks and whites, and then the gray again with the split. And now again I'm going to weave in ends at this point, but the next set of squares we're going to make are these black and white ones. Again, the black one is going to be just like any other, but the white one is going to be split. So one section is going to be made on top of this portion here, and the other section will be made on top of this. So I'm going to weave in ends and I'm going to see you again. So here I am with the ends on weaved in, and I'm going to now make these two squares here. So the square and two rectangles. I'm going to start with black yarn, attach it to the first gray square over here, and make my square just like any previous square I've made before. Will be again 7 stitches, the 7th one joined with that rectangular panel. So this is 1 2 3 4 5 6, and the 7th stitch will be here joined with the first one over here, and that's 7, and I'm going to make my return pass. So it's going to be just like any other square that we've made previously with a join, and the join will happen with this little rectangle here. So there it is. There's the first square from that rectangle, that one over there, and I'm going to cut the yarn here because I'm not going to have to carry it. But before I weave in ends, I'm going to attach my white yarn, because that next square here, it's 2 rectangles and it's white. And I'm going to make another rectangle on top of this one, and since this had 3 stitches, the one on top, the white one, will also have 3 stitches. So that's 1 2 and 3. So that's 3, and I'm going to make 5 rows of this. And I'm going to, so that completes my rectangle, the one with 3 stitches, and I'm going to cut the yarn, and here. So that completes the first portion of that square. If you look at this, this part of that square is done, the first rectangle. Now you could do one of two things. You could either continue working with the same white here and continue your diagonals there. This is a small swatch, but in the poncho you will have a lot more lines where you'd have to continue making these diagonals. They'll be longer diagonals. I like to make my diagonals as I go, so I completed all my diagonals as I went. So I'm going to continue doing that in this video too. So I'm going to make this rectangle over here to complete that entire diagonal row. So here again I'm going to attach my white yarn, and for this portion, because I had 4 stitches, I'm going to have 4 stitches for the rectangle that I'm going to make now. But in case of the poncho, you will have these 2 smaller rectangles have the same number of stitches. So here's 4. Here, that completes that square. Again, it's a total of 7 stitches, but if you look at it, they're split, and you can see that the split just continues. And so in this pattern over here, this line indicates that split, and it'll continue splitting, and that will be the front of your poncho. This part will go around your neck, and this will sit at the front. And I'm just gonna cut the yarn now. And that's it. That's how it looks. So again, I could either weave in ends right now, or I could make my last square, which I think I'm just going to make my last square first before I weave in ends. And so that's a gray square. That's the only one left over here, and I'm going to start making that now. So to do that, I'm going to first attach my gray yarn and make a square. 7 stitches, 5 rows, just like any other in this little swatch. And here I'm going to attach with this little rectangle. So I just completed that last square, and there's a bunch of ends to weave in at this point, but here, this is how it looks. And if you look at the pattern, it's an exact replica of this. So we've got a total of 12 squares. That includes like 4 rectangles which form squares, so that's 12 in all, with these little rectangles split over here that form the front. And the only part that's left now is, well, aside from weaving in ends, is to add that fur trim. So I'm going to go ahead, weave in ends, and show you how I did that. Alright, I just weaved in all my ends here, and at this point I would block my poncho. I have not done it here, but what I would do is I would pin this to a blocking mat, or in case of my poncho, because it's so big, I didn't have enough blocking mats to be able to attach those, so I just hung it on a hanger, and I used a steamer and I steamed the edges out. So that was enough. I did not need it to be an exact size or an exact shape. It came out pretty decent, a pretty decent rectangle even without it. I just wanted to even out the edges, so that's why I steamed it a little. So you should do that at this point before you go ahead and attach the fur. So now to attach the fur, if you see the solid black line, that is the entire perimeter of where I attached. So I started from I think I started from one side here. I went all the way, so I started from here, went all the way, did this edge here, and then I went around and did this edge here, completed it, and I stopped back here. So that's how I did my poncho. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to do this small section over here to show you how I did it, and so you'll know what to do. Again, you can choose to attach fur or not. It completely depends on what you would like to do. This is optional. I really liked my poncho after I attached the fur, so you could just do it in this section, which will be in the front, or you could do it all over. So it depends on how you would like your poncho to look. And I use this yarn called Go for Faux, Thick and Quick by Lion brand, and I really liked it. I like how it feels. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you how I did that. So I'm going to attach it in this little portion here. You need a needle and thread for this. So I did not crochet this portion for two reasons. The first reason being that it requires a larger hook, and these stitches are made with a smaller hook as compared to what the faux fur yarn needs. And you saw that it was this yarn was not very stretchy, and it was hard to insert a hook that size. So plus that got me thinking that the poncho was already quite bulky. It is how I like it. I wanted it to be bulky, but I didn't want to add too much more bulk by adding a lot of fur. So I decided to sew this to the side, just so I have sort of say a line here without adding too much bulk, but still having the fur. So I used a needle and thread. So I am not sure what thread this is. I had this in my box that my mom handed to me, and I have no idea what yarn this what brand this thread is. It's just something that I've been using to attach buttons when they fall off, and so anything that's strong enough that would be able to hold a button should work for this faux fur. So I made a little knot in the end here, and I'm going to start by attaching this thread to this yarn. So if you feel this yarn a little bit, in the center there is a little thick portion where I insert this needle and pull through so that that knot attaches itself so it won't come out. And now I'm just going to take this edge here, and I'm going to attach this here. So I'm going to take this last two bars here, I'm going to insert my needle, and that sort of does it. That's all I did. And now I'm going to make sure that I insert my needle into that center thick portion of the faux fur and pull, and then insert my needle back here, the two vertical bars of the next stitch, and just keep going. And I did it for every stitch in every row in my poncho. So here I'm going to find the next. So I already did it in the first one, attached it with the first one, the second one, and now I'm going to pick the 2 vertical bars of the third one and here, and then insert my needle through that center portion. I guess that's the spine of this yarn, where you can just that'll hold this tight and in place, so I won't have to worry about it slipping or falling. Sometimes this happens where my thread gets hard to pull through, but it works out. It just, you have to do a little tug and pull, not too hard, so it doesn't break. Now it's the fourth one, and I'm just going to continue doing this all the way till the center of that split. As you can see here. After a while, you'll get comfortable with how to attach this. So I've just started to now put my needle through these 2 vertical bars here, and then through that spine of the fur yarn, so I don't have to insert my needle twice. It just makes it faster. And here I am almost at the center, so this is the last stitch over here. I'm going to attach this here, and then I'm going to turn this. I'm going to attach this fur just in between these 2 stitches also, to just make it a little. So I'm sorry my video got cut off in between while I was making this. That's because I ran out of memory on my device that I was recording. But so I continued making, so I made this center, I attached the fur to the center here, just so the neck, the part at the neck becomes a little more sturdy. I don't think that it would be not sturdy without it. It was fairly sturdy even without it, but this just adds a little more sturdiness to it, and I really like it with this. So I continued attaching the fur all the way to the end on this side, and I ended it with a knot. I just and because this fur and the thread are the same color, I cut the thread and you can't even see where it is. So, and you can just cut the fur once you're done with where you want to stop, and it sheds a little in the beginning when you've cut it, but after it has stabilized, it stops shedding. So I love that about it. It doesn't continue to shed, and it doesn't just completely come off. So this is how it looks after it's done. This is the pattern that we followed, and it's this is the solid black line is where I added fur for my poncho. In this video I just showed you a small section so you know how to do it, but you could choose to either add it or not add it, or add it only in the front or all around, whatever you like, whatever your preference is. And that's pretty much it about making this poncho. It's I think it's fairly easy. It's just the entrelac technique. The only hard part, which I thought, was to carry the yarn between the blacks and whites, but aside from that it was pretty straightforward, and I really enjoyed making it. I hope you will enjoy making yours, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and I will be happy to help. If you like this video, I have a bunch of other tutorials on my blog and on my YouTube channel, and a bunch of free tutorials on my blog. So please feel free to check them out, and I will see you in my other videos. Bye-bye.